And I'd like to call the meeting of the Norfolk Advisory Committee to order. I will take attendance first. Jonathan Hurwitz.
Present.
Ken Fitzgerald. Here. Brian Bietzkowski. Here. Joyce Terrio.
Here.
David Lucas. Here. We have a quorum. We are looking forward to hearing this briefing. Tonight, we're going to hear a briefing on the status of the master plan that has been underway for 18 months or so, and is expected to be completed sometime in the early spring, I believe. I'll be corrected on that at some point, but I'll turn it over to Rich and Josh from MAPC. Rich?
So for me, I'm going to just turn it over to Josh and just observe and fill in here or there if necessary.
Okay.
So.
Before we get going, I just want to ask a question to get some clarification. I mean, we're not formally involved in the approval process. This is my understanding.
No.
This is just an opportunity for us to get an update on this, recognizing that we were involved in the sort of creation of it. Ken, who is a new member, was not involved in that process, but we funded this over 2 years, and twice they came in to ask for the funding, and we talked to them about the value of the master plan and things like that. We will talk about the value of the master plan at the end of the update on this, but I've gotten commitments from folks, and I want to make sure I keep emphasizing that I've gotten those commitments so we can continue receiving those commitments from folks in power here in the town of Norfolk. Rich, I'll turn it back to you.
And Ken, just a little other piece to it. We did receive $40,000 through the Community Compact Grant Program. For you aware of too. So, Josh.
Great, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Rich, and thank you, Advisory Committee, for having us this evening. Just to make sure we're the agenda item tonight, so that
you are it.
Okay, just to make sure, we wanted to be conscious of if we need to fit other things in. I'll try to be brief nonetheless, so we can have a discussion as well.
Yeah, I was going to say we don't want to be here for 2 hours, but you are it. So.
Got it. Yeah, don't give a planner free wheel in terms of talking, so we'll just go all night. Can I share my screen? Is that possible? I do have some images to share.
Yeah.
And we have, just as a note, we aren't quite to 18 months yet. I think we are. We started just about this time last year, so I think we're at just about 12 months right now.
You should be able to share your screen.
Thank you for that. Can you all see that fine?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so we've been doing a similar series of updates to other boards and committees at town. We're at I think, an interesting point in the process and progress, and so this is a great time to check in. As was noted, the advisory committee doesn't necessarily have a formal role in adopting the master plan at its conclusion. But what I would like to note in that regard, though, is implementation actions that do get identified out of this process. Things like zoning recommendations or other types of changes likely will come before the advisory committee down the road. So it's good to have this update as this progress is being made, just to have you all as aware of the context as possible, but also to give you an opportunity to weigh in on it too. So it's at a point of flexibility currently.
Thank you.
So I'll be brief, as I mentioned, but we do have a few items to cover. I want to give you a brief feeling of the process overall and where we've been and where we're going. Just clue you into an existing conditions brief if you're interested in that, and just let you know where it is and what it's about. And then really want to focus our discussion on a draft vision statement, which is a current sort of product that's being publicly reviewed as we speak, and then also draft goals, which are in the same situation. And I'll share with you the ways that public review is occurring as well. And then just talk about some next steps. We have a master plan steering committee, which includes the planning board in its entirety, and then also residents of various demographics and interests and amount of time they've lived in town. We also have a few what we're calling master plan ambassadors, who are kind of been along for the ride but aren't as involved, but do help us occasionally with emails and outreach and things like that. But it's been a very good group, and they have helped advise our work very closely. We meet with them about on a monthly basis as part of regular planning board meetings. I'm here with you this evening, but our MAPC team is pretty full and robust and have a lot of support in all of the planning technical expertise required of a master plan. So we have planners in a variety of areas, including transportation, economic development, land use, historical and cultural resources, open space, et cetera, not to mention our community engagement and data services support folks as well. So there's a full team that's been involved in the process, and they've been at meetings in person and on Zoom throughout this effort. So it's very good to have that type of support and roster on our team. The plan content, I think, is pretty straightforward, but if you haven't seen this, I'll just walk through it a little bit. That it's relatively hierarchical, and at the top of that hierarchy is a pretty general vision statement, which sets the overall direction for where the town would like to be heading. A master plan is looking on about a 10-year horizon, and thinking about where the types of strategic moves the town could be making to make sure it's headed in the right direction. You don't move in a direction unless it's expressed, and that's a part of what this master plan process is about. Underneath that vision statement are a series of topic areas, and those topic areas are arranged to add more detail to the vision statement and to organize the technical information, background information, data analysis, et cetera, into some meaningful areas, which are more, they're kind of planning oriented topics, but we've tried to make them as accessible as possible to the public as well. There's a lot of overlap between those topic areas, I would note. Each of the topics will have a series of goals and then more detailed strategies underneath those goals, all of which are designed to support the broader vision statement. Ultimately, all of that will be focused into an implementation action plan of sorts, where we give very tangible and concrete next steps to the town on how to accomplish these things and move in the direction of the vision. And just as a note on this slide, in the overall process, which I'll describe in a few different ways, but in terms of the content development, we are at the point now where we're actually, on our side, our team is developing draft strategies under a series of draft goals. The draft goals are being reviewed publicly, and then the next step will be to head down to that last section of implementation actions. So we're advancing quite a ways through the content development of the process. The process in general is broken into 3 main steps. We're in the second right now. The first was really just hearing from the community about issues and how, what needs to be addressed in the town, where that vision can maybe help address that, and how the goals and strategies can get there. We are in the middle of identifying those solutions to address issues that have been identified, and then providing more of a roadmap will be that final step. This gives you a little more detail in terms of the process related to community engagement. So back about a year ago, we started preparing for this process. We took a tour of the town with the planning board and steering committee members, met with department heads as a part of one of the town administrators' monthly department meetings last January, or I guess this year's January 2023. And then conducted some stakeholder analysis and got ourselves ready for this process. In February to June of this year, we really focused on getting out in the community. We had a series of forums, some workshops, showed up at events around town, Norfolk Baseball Day, the Norfolk Community Day, things like that, where we tabled and really just tried to get the word out as much as possible, where we engaged people with community-wide surveys and online surveys. We had over 1,000 participants in the online survey, which is fantastic, a great reach of that. So all of that was really intended to develop those issues which we're trying to address. Now we're in the process of drafting goals and strategies. The goals have been drafted and I'll go through the ways in which we're gathering community feedback on the goals. And then we'll be rounding out the process as we move into defining priorities and actions, headed towards probably about an April of 2024 wrap up of this process. Here's just a few images from all that engagement. This was back at the Freeman Kennedy School. I know there were a few advisory committee members in the audience. I actually see one in the photo there we've got on the screen. And so it was a good audience, good crowd, and it was a good kickoff. This was the visioning forum back in April. This is just an example of some of the other materials and setup we had. That was the tent from Community Day, where we got quite a few people circulating through. If you prefer to look at these types of processes in the form of a timeline, here that is. This is the same process I've just talked through, just kind of working across the timeline in months. I'm trying to think. I think I've mostly covered everything that shows up on this timeline, so I won't belabor those points. As we head into the future, we'll be continuing to meet with the steering committee on a monthly basis. We do have another community workshop, which will be positioned as all of these pieces come together to get some final feedback on any and everything with the community, and we'll have a final survey as well, in addition to what we're doing presently. Just to clue you in on a few of the things that were identified as challenges where the goals and strategies are looking to address. Managing growth and change was really the top item from a lot of people. 51% of the responses, or 509 people, thought that was the most critical challenge for the future. Related to that is the second one, which is attracting new investment and development. I think there's a lot of concern and consideration about what we'd probably call like sensitive growth, or growth with very strategic locations and typologies. And then that would also relate to the third item in some ways, which is expanding town amenities. But that might include also public amenities such as open spaces or parks and the like. So those are some of the challenges. Some of the opportunities are closely related as well. People do want to see somewhat expanded local services that they go typically to other towns to do, such as restaurants or certain types of personal services. There's a pretty decent split, I think, in the community as to whether there should be a grocery store or not a grocery store. We hear both sides of that, but a lot of people are passionate about it. Community events like the farmers market and what happens on the town green are very important to people, and sort of their relationship to the town and the building of community there. And then also there's very well liked and I think a strong feeling that the parks are doing well, and a good. One of the opportunities for improvement, though, is connections to the parks, particularly ways to get there without a car, sidewalks, bike paths, etc. And then looking for potentially things that the town has been concentrating on over years or decades, thinking about strengthening the town center, mixed use development there, commercial investment to enhance the tax base. All of those topics continue to be themes that we hear. A note on the existing conditions brief. So this is a document which pulls together research and analysis in each of those topic areas and puts it together as an interim product of the master plan. Some of this will turn into content that shows up in the master plan itself. Other items might not be, but this is a product which, if you're interested, there's a great wealth of information about the town in it, including other details about the way this process has been engaging the community and what we've heard. That's available at the website that you see on the screen, which is the website for the master plan process, mapc.ma/Norfolk 2035. You can download that. Just an example of a few of the types of data that are in there. So this is a chart which shows the number of jobs by industry in the town over the last 11 years. And that's pretty interesting to see the ebb and flow of jobs across those different industry sectors and how where those trends are and what's happening across the town. Relatively consistent around, some ebb and flow, but maintaining around 2,000 jobs across the town, which is a solid number. Can
I stop you there?
Yeah, sure.
Do the prisons show up on this? The prison employment show up on that? I understand they don't necessarily all live in town, but are they under public
Yeah,
Does the prison employment show up here?
Yes, I do. I do believe it would show up here. I'm looking to see what category it would likely show up under. I think it would probably fall into the other services except public administration category. But because those jobs are located in the town, they would show up in this data. I think that's right.
Can you follow up on that? Because that's a huge chunk of employment, and admittedly, I don't think we have a lot of other employment in town, but they would be a third of a 2,000 chunk of employment, almost. Just a piece of, or just a request. Make sure they show up there, or not. But, make sure you know that they don't show up there. Thank you.
Yeah, we can look into that. Thanks for the question. Another sort of aspect of data, which I think is interesting, just highlighting it, is in the report here. This is a change in commuting modes across the time period of the pandemic. So you can see that things like the WFH, which is the work from home category, jumps up, that's imaginable. And that so from 8% to 21% in the town. And that's actually stronger than you see compared to the subregion that Norfolk's in with your surrounding municipalities, and then our entire greater Boston region as well. You can see a commensurate shift downward in driving, but then also a downward, losing a few percentage points on transit as well. And I think you see that in the commuter rail parking lots. I mean, that's just some of those shifts that have occurred. And then this is a map of all of the sidewalk network and walking trails in town today, where they're concentrated and where there might be additional connections needed. So just examples of the types of information, both data and spatial, that's in this document. And then these are some crash locations on the roadway network in the town, including whether or not they had injuries. So you're welcome to download that. And again, if there are additional questions, we'd be happy to take a look at anything, any additional clarification that's needed. Moving into the draft vision statement, and this is one of the content items, which is drafted and we've been collecting feedback on. We formatted this in a manner similar to the way the vision statement was formatted in the previous master plan from 2007. And that was a simple sort of bulleted list where defining what the Norfolk citizens would like to see over this time period of the master plan. And I do think it's descriptive of what we've heard, and it also does set a direction for the master plan overall. And what we try to do is strike kind of a balance between ambition and practicality in the vision statement. We don't want it to be too idealistic and pie in the sky, but we also want it to, set some ambition, but not be unachievable. So it includes things like the town center being a center of town life. And I think that is true in a variety of ways in the master plan. It will expand on that, but that's really a center point of a lot of what we heard. Preserving the semi-rural and village character is critically important to a lot of people. Having a town that defines and attracts the types of services and amenities desired by our residents, and then works toward achieving that rather than having sort of growth and change happen to the town, be more proactive about it. Putting the town in a better position for the next generation. I think that's a nice sort of legacy approach to growth and change in the town and investment. Again, relating to both of those two earlier points, being patient and working towards those outcomes. And I think we've heard that a lot. Planning for the long term with town investments and sustainable services and infrastructure. Planning and creating a connected network of open space and town facilities. And those connections would be potentially including secondary townwide walking and biking networks that might not be connected to the roadway network. It could be something independent like the Metacomet Greenway plans. Creating housing opportunities and options for all life stages. We heard a fair amount about the difficulty or inability to downsize or move to a different housing type in the town, but people wanting to stay in town, but having trouble doing so. Supporting community health and safety, and then also thinking about the train station as a central community feature, and people still understand that that's an asset. And supporting the overall community to, the sense of community and building that community together. So this is the points we have today, and then we have invited residents through a variety of formats to comment on what they like about this, what's missing perhaps, what could be edited or wordsmithed, and are accepting that feedback. We're accepting a similar level of feedback on the goals, and I'll just walk you through the goals set up first, and then tell you a little bit about, I've mentioned a few times how we're getting feedback, and I think that series of slides is in just a moment. So the goals, the origins of the goals come from a few places. So we're deriving them directly from what we've heard from the community, of course. So directly from community feedback, and we have a lot of goals which relate directly to challenges that have been identified by the community. We also have goals which are arriving from data analysis and existing conditions analysis of the kind that I just showed you, sort of the economic data, the transportation data, et cetera. And then a few goals which are emerging just from more of a best practice, that they weren't necessarily a topic that was discussed, but something that should be on the town's radar and considering as we think about the future. Let me see actually where those slides, I'm sorry, I'm just going to skip through a few because I do want to show you. Okay, yes, I put them here, sorry. I'll cover them now since I've referenced them a few times, but the ways that we're gathering input on the vision statement and the draft goals are through the web page. We have a more traditional online survey that's available. We also have something a little bit different and new. I think it's kind of exciting. It's more of an interactive online open house where people can make comments on any of the items, the goals, the vision statement, et cetera. And then they can interact with each other. They can upvote someone else's comment. They can downvote a comment. They can make a comment on a comment. So it's much more interactive than a survey. You can see anything else anyone else has posted and talk as a community on that forum. We've had over 180 participants on that forum alone, which is fantastic. We've also received feedback through the more traditional survey. We've had paper copies available at the town hall as well. And then just as we're meeting with you at the advisory committee this evening, we've also met with the select board, Small Business Association of Norfolk, the Council on Aging, the Conservation Commission, the Lions Club. So we've kind of made the rounds and promoted people getting engaged in this way. And in the end of a couple weeks, actually the beginning of a couple weeks from now, on December 18th, I think is when we've slated to close all of this feedback, and then we will compile everything that we've received through all the various channels and look for patterns and themes and information so we can make revisions. And again, the kind of major repository for all that is the project website. And we do have a pretty robust email list, which we've just pumped out a notice to make sure people are connecting all this too. I think there's over 500 people on the master plan email list who have signed up. So let me just go back through some of these. And I know that this may be starting to feel long, so I'll try to do this in as succinct a way as possible, but also do want to give you a chance to see some of the content as it's developing. So we have these draft goals for each of the topics. And really, I think they do capture a lot of what's been talked about. And for example, in land use, there's a focus on that sensitive and concentrated growth in areas where the existing growth has already occurred. So focus on the town center, of course, focus on the commercial area around Route 115 and 1A, other areas like River's Edge, to really strengthen these already non-residential areas as compact walkable places over time and enhance those features of those places, while encouraging additional commercial growth to help the tax base of the town. Continuing to update the zoning over time as the town has done to support those goals and sort of look for issues and opportunities to make that connection between the regulations and the goals and vision for the town stronger over time. I'm giving you a high level review, and then we can share this presentation as well for you to comment, or you're welcome to go on any of those formats I just shared as well. In terms of economic development, there's a lot of strength. We've met with the Small Business Association a few times in this process, and they're an active group. There's a lot of strength in local small businesses in the town. What's interesting is there's a lot of home occupations in the town. So small businesses which are operated out of homes, they don't necessarily show up in storefronts around, but they are there. And that's a lot of economic development activity and even employment opportunities that we're thinking about strategies for the town to be able to support those local small businesses, but while continuing to focus on town center as a major driver of economic development and community in the town. Continuing to collaborate with property owners to get right-sized development where you might have right-sized spaces to maybe make a connection with some of those small businesses that already exist in town. And then also, again, trying to drive additional commercial or even industrial development to the right locations and of the right scale. Thinking a lot about the major redevelopment opportunities in the town, Southwood Hospital property, of course, Buckley Man property, and the processes underway to make those more active contributors to the tax rolls of the town again. In terms of housing, it's really tied and connected to the recently completed housing production plan of the town as well. But increasing the affordable housing share in Norfolk to better serve a range of household incomes, and also importantly, give Norfolk control over 40B approvals. I think that's an important aspect of being able to proactively plan for development in the town, is to not have development show up wherever it can through those regulatory processes, to really gain control over that. While doing so, expand housing options. We've heard a lot about if people want to own a single family home, they've got a lot of options to do that. But if they want to rent a different housing type, there's not as many options in town today for that. And continuing to integrate mixed use development in targeted areas and encourage that. In terms of transportation, we heard a ton in every meeting, in every setting, about expanding walking and biking and street safety. Of course, the town and DPW have been doing as much as they can. They've gotten, I would say, the low-hanging fruit in terms of locations where sidewalks and bike paths and bike trails can happen. And so we need to kind of be more inventive in the next phase of building out a more comprehensive bike and walking network in the town. That might include things of looking at utility corridors, other ways to make those connections that are safe and reliable for pedestrians and bicyclists. But it's one of the ways to also counteract congestion locally, is to, one less car on the road is one less car making traffic. So the more you can make that safe and easy for a family to ride their bikes to the parks for soccer games on a Saturday, that makes a difference, both in terms of parking and traffic. I think decreasing auto dependence in general, which is difficult. It is true that it's difficult to become less car oriented in a place that driving is often the only option to get to certain destinations. So creating as many opportunities as we can over time, this is a longer term prospect, but doing that is what we heard a lot of desire for. So that's what a lot of the transportation goals focus on. We heard much less in terms of, not as much actually, even in terms of congestion. I was going to say we heard hardly anything about what we hear in some communities about cut through traffic or other types of traffic issues, but really more of a desire to kind of leave the car at home and get out in a different way. This is a good example of another bullet point at the very bottom of this slide, is an example of a goal that came from an emerging best practice, wasn't necessarily talked about in the town, but planning for future transportation technologies. So electric vehicle infrastructure, potentially, it looks like it's a little further on the horizon than maybe it used to be, than people thought it was maybe a year or two ago, but things like autonomous vehicles and how that might change the infrastructure of the town. On a 10-year horizon, it's imaginable that those types of things will have to be on the radar. So that's a bullet point from that sort of emerging best practice realm. Open space and recreation, really thinking about expanding the functionality of parks and open space to include topics such as resilience in the town or flood protection, while also enhancing recreation, both active and passive recreation, protecting the natural resources and the semi-rural character of the town of critical importance to people in the town, and creating and continuing to create high quality parks and recreation programs. And I think the recreation department has a fantastic track record of doing that. You're attracting residents from other towns to your recreational programs because they're so well run and organized. Historical and cultural resources, I think, is a real area for growth. What we've seen is that there's not as many systems for both understanding and documenting historic resources, narratives, and cultural resources in the town today. So this is an area where we are trying to build a stronger foundation and have recommendations to help the town do that. Preserving and protecting Norfolk's historical heritage is important to people, but it's not as obvious the sort of systems to do that today. So we have some suggestions for you that will come through in the strategies as well. And then also sustaining the important cultural events. A lot of them are run by local organizations like the Lions or others. And Norfolk Community Day and events on Town Hill are an important feature of what people think is, really brings the community together. So I think as much as possible, one of the recommendations will be to see how many of those actually can be located or even relocated to the town center. If the town center is the center of town life, then it would be fantastic to have more of these events occur there. And then lastly, actually not lastly, we've got two more, sorry. Community health, thinking about increasing the use of local health data to track community health more proactively. I would say currently community health shows up in the Board of Health, for example, is mostly concerned about septic and water systems, and they have a less bandwidth and resources or ability to think beyond those areas of focus and think about community health more broadly. They, I would say, have a desire potentially to do so, but don't currently have the ability to do so. But I think the pandemic highlights the importance of building a little bit more robust framework locally for community health and the ability to support individual health through these systems. And finally, community facilities and services, continuing to sort of refine and professionalize the town's approach to capital improvements and the budgeting process, both in terms of built facilities, but also things like the fleets of various departments and divisions. Thinking about opportunities to generate clean energy. I think that the examples like the solar array on the landfill are excellent sort of local measures to reduce the town's carbon footprint and to become potentially more energy independent over time. And that relates to the town's resilience and sustainability as well. Strengthening opportunities like enterprise funds to provide better services and expand the town's ability to fund them. And then making information and processes more transparent and accessible. I think the town is generally doing a good job. We didn't hear as vocal sort of voices through the community on some of those, but we did hear it mentioned occasionally. And then thinking, this is another one from the best practice bucket, but thinking about potential and continuing challenges in the labor market as related to municipal and public servants and the rising costs of services and the ability to attract talented people who will serve the town residents in those capacities. And that's also including challenges in community safety as well, the police department, the fire department, and making sure that those staff, I think the new fire station will go a long ways in terms of staff recruitment and retention, and at least that department. And I did most of those slides already. And the next step, I would say all of this and more, if you haven't checked out the website, it's a great resource. There are also recordings of previous meetings if you're really curious. As I mentioned, we have a few months still ahead of us, and we'll be wrapping up this sort of phase of engagement, which is focused on the goals and the vision statement. And then we'll be moving into the more detailed aspects. The way that's working is we would expect that there will be refinement to the vision statement and the goals. And some of these goals that the draft goals we just talked through a little bit, and you saw on the screen, some of those might be deeply refined or even disappear, or you might see new ones show up based upon how the community reacted to these initial draft goals. So appreciate the time today, and I'd be happy to go back to any single of those slides or discuss any questions that might have arisen as I went through that pretty quickly.
I have some questions, but does anyone have any questions at this point? Or?
Yeah, but why don't you go first? Because I don't know how to phrase it.
So one of the early questions I had, Josh, is one of in your sort of survey responses, you had a number of 509 people responded to the top one. So what was the total response, I guess, would be the question, because you don't just add all those numbers up because people indicated more than. I'm more curious, what was your total response in terms of surveys and things like that? Because that's a big number. It's a pretty good sized number for a town of 10,000 people,
Yeah.
I think. So I'm just sort of curious generally about that.
Yeah, so the survey overall had 1,000 respondents. I think we were like 1,001 or something. It was amazing, almost exactly at 1,000. It's not all 1,000 respondents responded to every question. So I think there's variation, of course, in the survey responses from a question to question basis. If I recall correctly, that question in particular was you could choose more than one answer and also fill in your own blank if you didn't agree with some of there were pre-populated answers based upon initial research. And so that it's hard to tell in terms of the 500 is single people voting for that, but they probably also voted for something else as well in that.
No, well, 1,000 means there was more than 50%, and that's kind of where I was trying to figure out. Okay. And I'm impressed with that number. That's good. And then you sort of addressed a lot of them. I have a question. It's sort of a very specific question. It's kind of a question for both Rich and Josh, because Josh, I know you were involved in the rezoning of town center. Yes. And I know that since we went through that process, there was this pandemic thing that sort of threw everything up in the air. But Rich, it's sort of a two-part question. Has there been any expressed interest in doing stuff in town center? And Josh, is there a timeline expectation where we can see the zoning work that we did as either successful or needing to be changed again, I guess would be the way I would ask it, because I don't see anything different outside the windows here. So, and I know that there's been hurdles that were not anticipated the day town meeting voted on those changes, but so it's a kind of a two-part question. One's a practical operational questions and one's kind of a planning question. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rich, you want me to kick it off, or you want to start?
You can start, and I'll add more of what I'm hearing lately. So as people, yeah.
I think that in general, I would agree that with the observations that you made, that there have been some additional burdens placed on mixed use development in general that the pandemic certainly didn't help. I think the current lending
interest rates, right.
They don't help either right now. Right. But you do see in other places, I mean, development continues. There are projects that are going forward, of course. I'd say that The attention hasn't really come through from the development community just yet in this in Norfolk Town Center. I think what we've seen in this master plan process for sure is that the desire and interest in seeing additional investment there is very robust in the community side of things. I like the way you phrased the question in that, potentially revisiting the zoning. I know it was a long and tough process in some ways, but I think that the master plan could point to, looking at options like that in the future, because it is such a priority that you do want to see investment there. That I don't think we'll work hard to not have that be the only strategy, but that could be a reasonable approach to revisit the characteristics of that zoning to see if there would be changes that might make it more attractive to development. But I also know, maybe Rich can go into this too, but there are, and I think you all know this, it's pretty well known, that there are some also fundamental leasehold restriction type problems on some of the key properties for redevelopment in the town center. And so what I liked about the phrasing in the vision statement of making the town center a center of town life is that it is more expansive than mixed use redevelopment alone. And I do think there are things that the town could do to make the town center a more vibrant and a sort of appealing place to the community. And that doesn't have to be solely dependent on private investment on those properties.
Thank you.
So in terms of what I'm hearing in terms of people looking at sites in the center of town, one of the challenges that is the amount in terms of some of the sites to build out from a commercial perspective to be able to be able to lease that much space is a challenge. Some of those sites in terms of, because the way the bylaw is structured in the center of town, we have the commercial on the first floor and then the residential above, second and third. But then there's another provision which we did look at, and obviously Josh is involved with this, with the B1, where you could actually have a mix of commercial and residential on the site, but they didn't necessarily have to be, commercial and residential above it. You could have standalone residential with commercial on the site in, multiple buildings. But the way the present bylaw is written, and this is a big struggle, I know some of you all were involved with this, was that there's a limitation in terms of, which understandably the limitation, but it's also tied to the building footprint as well. So that commercial footprint can't the residential can't outsize the residential footprint. So that has something that's come up fairly frequently on the larger sites. They certainly can keep with the scaling of the residential in terms of what the density is, that we have, that it's not a huge, like these sites, in many cases, they're not going to support a large number. So for example, some of the sites, maybe 12, 13 units, something like that's fine. But the first floor commercial, to be able to put that footprint above it is kind of the challenge we're hearing.
Okay.
Which is tough, because I know that's not what people want to have see. And
that specific topic was a significant bone of contention during the discussions, was commercial and residential in the front building and all residential in a back building. That was pretty controversial. So
yes, yep.
So all right, I'm just, because a lot of the goals seem to focus on town center, that I was very curious about that. And obviously, starting in 2020, and then with the interest rates going through the roof and inflation and things like that, and construction costs have all put up, roadblocks that were not necessarily fully anticipated for 4 years ago. So, you know, and it is something that will obviously be key to whatever happens next with master plan is. And Josh, I appreciate what you're saying about trying to drive other activities into the town center, and make it a more appealing place to put walkable commercial. I mean, if there's something going on downhill and people want to grab a bite to eat afterwards or pick up some groceries on the way home, whatever it might be, it would be nice if they could do it at some place besides our only one convenience store now, kind of thing. So, and our pizza place, which is good pizza, but, so just, you know, it's a question I have.
I think it just one last point on the town center too. I think that will show up in the strategies likely, and the town has been making progress on it, and Rich has been a big part of that. But the expansion of a town center wastewater system, I think, is another one of those infrastructural barriers that currently exist that if the town can make progress on, that could also help unlock, in addition to potentially some zoning challenges. The wastewater is a huge burden and challenge.
Obviously, yeah. And I think you're right. I think we are making progress in that area. I think Rich has unfortunately been burdened with a lot of that work, trying to figure out how to work through that. But thank you, Rich.
So I could give you a quick
Anyone
update on that if you want, on the sewer, if that's okay, or is that?
Sure, quick.
I mean, it's relatively. So we're before the select board last night, and in terms of working towards the initial objective was to try to do a new plant for the center of town with a discharge field behind the Freeman Kennedy School. But with the data that we've collected so far and some of the testing, it's not turning out to really be a feasible, cost-effective option, because of the cost in general, build the plants and so forth. But just the field itself, there's quite a bit of silt layers. So the new direction, if you will, is to look at MCI Norfolk, with the closing of the Cedar Junction plant, looking to perhaps tie into the plant there and buy sewer capacity. When we first started the sewer master plan, the state was in the process of, they had to upgrade the plant to deal with their own compliance issues with the permit. And there was no interest in, taking on a customer, a resident, a community to tie into it. Fast forward to now, Cedar Junction is closed. They have a fully functioning plant that's roughly 500,000 gallons a day. So we have made contact with them, at least preliminarily, with the director, and it seems that there is a potential feasibility for us to get between 40,000 80,000 gallons a day, which would do quite a few things, actually. One, provide a sewer capacity, but also could mean that we might be able to, get rid of the meeting house plant in the center of town, and then just be completely, the sewer we'd be sewer users and not have to maintain and operate our own wastewater treatment plant. So, so we're continuing to pursue that angle on the wastewater.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Brian, did you?
Yeah, I do like the idea of the town center being the center of town life. And I think I'm very interested in seeing what the specific implementation recommendations are, because a lot of these challenges we've had have come down to implementation. And if there's specifically things that are within the town's control. So we know that a lot of people are delaying potential development, looking at options of greater residential capacity. So it's actually pricing some of the commercial options higher, making them competitive with residential square footage as opposed to commercial square footage. Are there things that the town can do to use our capacity, our land, to show that there's a demand there for increased commercial usage that may bring some of that delay, or hoping that things become residential as opposed to commercial options. Is there anything the town can do to get that jump started? And my mind goes to things like the music on Town Hill and the events on Town Hill where we do have food trucks and stuff come in that show that there is this demand down there. But is there anything else other towns have done to jumpstart the commercial property availability?
Yeah, I think that topic was one that was well discussed also in the town center process. And I think it's a tough one. The one I would say, the very interesting insight that the master plan process is, I think, shown in that regard is the preponderance of small businesses that exist in the town that aren't in commercial spaces today. And that's in the observation from some of them that they wouldn't mind being not in their home. They would like to lease a space. And so I do think there's potentially some productive, a productive area of exploration to see if that sort of latent demand or existing demand, it's sort of demand that's there and could be tapped, can somehow be unlocked or made known so that so it becomes more clear that if you build a commercial space that there's potentially this market of people who might lease it, even if it's a less traditional leasing. I think that's what the part of the issue is that the traffic counts and the visibility or even the demographics and population and sort of the disposable income, all those metrics which a developer might use to really define the marketplace for a ground floor non-residential commercial type space, they don't show well comparatively to other potential locations in the area. And to therefore, I think, make the case with what we're learning about this, there's this alternative which is less seen in the data, but is probably pretty real. If we could help the town, or the town could do a little more legwork, or maybe the Small Business Association can help themselves to put that portfolio case together to say, like, we've got these many businesses, they're willing to pay this much rent, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. One other thing is there's a few of the goals that seem to be creating tension. So, for example, maintaining the semi-rural nature, but also increasing commercial aspect when, like, as you just said, the decision to build commercial includes them having more traffic and having a less rural feeling. It would be great to have kind of a summary of those choice points of, like, where does the town need to throw a stake in the ground and say we are either going to maintain the rural and say that will come with a certain set of lack of commercial business tax base, or we will do this and we are willing to say we are going to lose some of the rural feeling on the 1A corridor potentially or somewhere else, but like just to be explicit about where there is a tension between the goals and how do you reconcile both of those or have to make a decision.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that would be very helpful. I also think that for that example specifically, a part of it is sort of this built into that. We didn't use the language of sort of anti-sprawl, but it is kind of built into the planning principle of sort of anti-sprawl, where you can develop previously areas which we've identified, which are well known and already developed. Those can become more concentrated or optimized in terms of their contributions to the tax rolls or the density of businesses, et cetera. While doing that, you can also not allow development in the areas which are still not developed land. They're wooded properties, et cetera. And I think that does maintain the semi-rural while increasing commercial both. So it's not necessarily a choice of either. But I agree that there is a tension there for sure. And it would be good to maybe define that tension and be more specific about both what I just said and sort of some of the trade-offs.
So one of the, I know the advisory committee had, the concern about, the value of these planning exercises too. So that's, I know you
Some of the
touched
advisor, Rich, some of the advisor.
some, sorry, but I think I think we should touch on that a little bit. I think that was, so in terms of, because we do have, unfortunately, and Josh could speak to this, it's not as organized necessarily from the state level coming down on some of these plans. So, for example, in this planning process, we do talk about open space and recreation and cultural, which overlap into the open space and recreation plan. Those same topics will be discussed in that planning process as we go underway on that. But yet both of them have a purpose in terms of their value. So in terms of the open space and recreation, there are grants tied specifically to that plan that if you don't have one, you can't apply for certain pots of money. Where a master plan, while it's in the statute, is not as stringent per se, but yet this planning process feeds into those other grants. So for example, I'm working on the Metacomet Greenway right now in terms of that design pilot. The questions that are being asked in that particular document or the application is, was this something discussed in your master plan? What was the community engaged in that process? Was it something that was identified in your open space and recreation plan? So I just want to kind of, speak to a little bit. It's not, while the master plan is not necessarily mandated, but it does come into play as we go after different grants that it might be available to us to try to tackle some of these projects. When it comes, and it's a broad spectrum too. So it can be some of the trail projects, road projects, and so forth, that they'll want to see the community engaged in those processes and what is your plan saying about some of those topics. So just to touch on that just briefly. But what I wanted to say, one more thing, I'm sorry about this, but an ideal tool that we haven't, and I was able to get this done in a previous town. It's called transfer development right. It's a land use preservation tool where you establish areas where you have preservation areas where you want to identify, and then you have a area where you send development where it has higher concentrations. I just want to share briefly on it with you. It's a great tool in a community like Norfolk because of, again, you have the low density rural areas where you don't have the infrastructure, and those areas tie in directly to the rural feel of the town, etc. I will tell you the challenge is to make the economics work on that, because I was able, when this was back in Raynham, we were able to get the bylaw through, but to make the economics where the value of a development right was high enough for somebody to sell it off just wasn't there. And which is unfortunate, and it does happen in other parts of the country, but we haven't been able to land that tool yet here, which is it could be such a functional tool to do exactly what you were talking about, Brian, for some of these areas. So still going to try that at some point. I think we need to explore it and see if there's creative ways to do it. And that's my side note on that, just as something that we should give consideration to.
Thanks. I have a kind of a wrap up, but Jonathan, did you have any questions? I keep forgetting to defer to the member on the air.
No, that's okay. No questions for me. And thank you, Josh. It was a great presentation. Appreciate it.
So if no one's got any questions, I just have a general question on process. What happens when the master plan is completed? Who owns that document? And what I've continued to emphasize this, as have other members of the committee, is that a previous master plan was lightly used in its early years and not really even looked at after 3 or 4 years, I don't think. Who owns this the day it's finalized? And how does it get finalized, and who owns it the day it's finalized?
Yeah, so master plans are typically adopted by the planning board. So the planning board is the ultimate sort of finalizer of it, which is in part why the full planning board has been involved in the master plan committee, because it's very helpful to have the full board aware of the process in great detail as they will ultimately adopt the plan. In terms of implementation, we do have a few items remaining in the process that I hope will be helpful to make it less of a book on a shelf sort of situation. The first is that as we get through sort of refining the goals and have some strategies underneath those goals, which will be a little more detailed and specific, we plan to revisit our meeting with department heads and department leaders to ground truth some of those strategies, and they'll be able to say to us, nope, tried that, never gonna work. You're gonna go through that list with us and let us know the reality of it. And I think that will, by going through that process in our process, it will make implementation more real. And then we also plan to recommend, which I think is pretty well a master plan best practice at this point, to recommend the formation of a master plan implementation committee, which would be formed at the conclusion of this process. And it could include members that have been on the master plan committee to help create the plan, but it could include others or representatives from other committees and boards who may be identified as responsible parties for certain actions or strategies. So that is another way I think that has helped other municipalities to really breathe life into implementation of a master plan. And then the other approach, as I mentioned, our sort of final content area is to actually develop an action plan in some of those key priority areas. We don't plan to build out an action plan for every single, like there's a lot of content in this plan, so it won't be comprehensive, but it will be for those sort of key features, like how do you actually make some progress at town center, for example. I think that will probably be among them. And another might be the walking and biking, since we've heard so much about it, and actually give the town some concrete steps to make progress on that.
Ken? Yeah.
I can't resist. I have to. So, two things. I have two things. First is more of just a mere kind of common observation with the town center stuff. I think one of the obvious hurdles here, the elephant in the room, is taxes, property taxes, and red tape. So, obviously, something in the master plan maybe suggesting to boards like us and the select board and the people who deal with warrant articles is, hey, is there a credit, a rebate, an incentive to build something new here? Will zoning be favorable to, you need, your residential space isn't quite something. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the obvious ones. Why would I build a new building in downtown Norfolk when I can build it in downtown Walpole or downtown Franklin and have a train station right there, all the other things right there, and the property tax be a lot less. So when I take in rent every month, I make more money. I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room. And then the second thing, just other observation, the two most expensive things in municipal government are education and public safety, and they're missing. Now I get it, it's a planning document, a lot about zoning, a lot about open space, but when people say they want all the parks interconnected, a lot of the parks are attached to schools and walkability. Are the schools okay to having the kids walk to school on these connected trails that go there? Because right now the school bus stops at a house across the street from one of the schools, which, as somebody who drives a car, drives you nuts when you see the bus pull out and there it is. So, some of this involving these other stakeholders, education, they're a huge one. We've got a $53 million expansion to a 10-year-old school to solve a problem at a school that's, $43 million expansion to a school to solve a 10-year-old school to solve a problem at a school that's 3 years out from potential talk of replacement. So, and would putting something in the center of town draw more people here? So it's just, I think the education piece is missing. And I'll throw the public safety piece. When you put the walking trails, someone like me or the fire chief's going to come out and say, well, now we need a special purpose off-road vehicle to go rescue the person that rolled their ankle on said walking trail out in the middle of nowhere. That's $60,000. And I'm going to train people to do it. It's going to cost X. And I've got to house the thing somewhere. I don't have enough garage space to get to add on. And it just goes and goes and goes. And where does it end? And then I'll tell you, oh, my police stations basically and rent them. And my goodness, if somebody falls in the trail up behind the Freeman Kennedy School, I can't drive my off-road vehicle there. So I need a trail. It goes on and on. So there's just a few pieces of the big picture that are missing. And they're the two most expensive pieces in any town. On the local government side is public safety, on the education side is education. And I don't see them here. So, and I see them here in pieces, capital planning, facilities, a lot of it's here in pieces, but they're not talked about where, where Health and Human Services had, they had a big bullet point there, and that's, less than 1% of most municipal side, the town government things. So just some things I've noticed. That's all.
I think those are great points. To be honest, it's a little bit of the sort of known blind spot of comprehensive master plans in the way that they're practiced, is that typically education is addressed somewhat, but relatively tangentially, and because the schools have their own facilities master plans, and there's a whole sort of world there that this type of plan interacts with, but doesn't fully accomplish. We have met with the superintendents, we've met with principals, we've met with the chief of police, met with the chief of fire, et cetera. So we are having those conversations about those sort of needs and interrelationships. I do think there are things where there is a little stronger overlap as you move to more of the transportation network. Like there's the Safe Routes to School program, which is all about children's safety, as they may not be bused to school, but walking or biking to school, and it's a whole funding stream and sort of implementation effort, which is accomplishable because there's funding behind it. So I think there is some overlap there. But your notes about public safety are key too, and I think while it's another area where we integrate some individual sort of strategies or considerations, and again we'll be checking back in with the chief as we get towards those strategies. It is a whole nother world that it's just the kind of thing where we can't, in most of the areas, not all, but most of the areas that the master plan touches, we have a little more authority to touch. But in those cases, we can't kind of put the master plan on top of the police department to tell them how they should do public safety.
I look at it like everywhere. I'm a police chief in a different community, so everywhere I've worked, we've done like a 5-year strategic plan, right? And the fire department, that's big thing now. This is the 5-year strategic plan, the 5-year capital plan, and it's just having that overlap. So the town has the giant master plan, but I have my plan. Fire chief has his plan. The school has their plan. So now all of a sudden there's all these silos, and we have a master plan, and we want to make the center of the town more vibrant, but we're going to move the police station 5 miles away. We're going to build a new school 2 miles away, and we're going to do everything against this massive document that we're spending money on. So it's just trying to kind of bring the spokes in the wheel in to some degree.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it's that points to sort of a very simple fundamental principle where it's like future town facilities and major investments should become more centralized if you want to have a center that is the center of life. I mean, that's a pretty simple and straightforward concept. And of course, it's more complicated in real life, but I think as a general principle that could have some mileage.
One other question that jumped in is, you talk to the people who are running businesses out of their home. Are you able to document the actual barriers they say to why they are not finding commercial space in town? Have you asked them that question directly? Like, why don't you have a commercial space?
Yeah, we do. We did actually. It was mostly through our engagements with people who are a part of the Norfolk Small Business Association. And I would have to refer to the notes from that discussion, but we did talk about that specifically about why are they working out of their home and not in a space? I think part of that answer was a general mismatch between sort of the type and size of space that's available and what they might need. And then others are their business and operations and revenue from those businesses and operations aren't at the scale yet that they would feel comfortable paying additional rent beyond their own the mortgage on their home. I think, but some of them did express that it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem too, because to get over that hurdle of growth where you can actually have an employee, staff or additional employees, there's a sort of a dynamic there where you can't do one without the other, and so which goes first, and where's the risk and your tolerance for that risk. So I think those were a few of the considerations that we heard.
That'd be great to get documented as well. So as we look to ways to improve the town, maybe addressing those barriers directly.
Yeah, great point.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to get this update. It's been helpful. I intend to stay on top of the implementation portions of this. I've lived in town for a while and seen a couple of this. I know I was involved in developing the 2007 plan as a member of the Conservation Commission, and don't know what happened to it. So I'll be staying on top of it, and we'll be interested to see how it comes out.
Excellent. We do greatly. Your feedback was very much appreciated.
Yeah, really thoughtful questions and insights, and I've got some notes from our conversation. We'll try to integrate each of those items. So we thank you for the time. It was really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Having said that, we have nothing else on the agenda, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Adjourned. Thank you.